I am thrilled to be joined on stage by Her Excellency Sarah Al Amiri, the Minister of State for Advanced Technology, for our next conversation. We're going to talk a little bit today about this nexus between decarbonisation and technology, which, of course, Her Excellency has vast expertise in, and we're thankful for you for sharing your insights and knowledge with us. To begin, Your Excellency, help us understand the guiding principles for the UAE when it comes to this issue of decarbonisation.
Assalamu alaikum. A very good morning to you, Dan. Very good morning to everyone here. Thank you for joining us on the second day of this very important climate tech discussion that actually looks at unlocking the potential of one of the major tools to realize the challenge that we need to face with regards to net zero commitment, especially by 2050. To unlock the how, there needs to be an investment across the board in technologies that are, one, tackling our hard-to-abate sectors. So sectors that are the highest emitters that needs to look at the whole of value chain approach. The first approach is through carbon capture and ensuring that carbon is captured across the production process. The second is a mechanism to ensure that you're unlocking the value chain. So it's a whole of value chain effort in terms of where you're sourcing your raw materials, what type of energy is being utilized, how do you ensure there's efficiency across the value production, and every single question here is addressed by a certain technology that is deployed across that value chain. In an industry-to-industry perspective, the UAE has committed, especially in the hard-to-abate industries, to lower the carbon footprint, to find mechanisms to reutilize carbon, to diversify its sources of energy, and to ensure that cutting-edge investments is being made in research and development to uplift the production process and ensure that technology, again, remains at the heart of creating an impact. Now, the question is why? At the end of the day, we're not going to meet our climate commitment if it's going to be disruptive to our economies. We need to work hand in hand. These two matters need to be coupled rather than the current dialogue that sets them as if they're antagonistic to each other. You can unlock potential if you invest correctly in the necessary research. You pinpoint cutting-edge technologies at the right portion of the value chain, because at the end of the day, it's going to increase efficiency and increase production, therefore have the necessary economic impact. Then comes, of course, the various policies that need to be in place on a national perspective to ensure that a whole of system approach gets towards a net zero commitment that different countries have worked towards. And finally, we create on the positive side of this new industries that are green technology industries and feed into this new ecosystem that is formed. So it is an impactful mechanism and an actual proactive mechanism to ensure that there is the correct impact and the correct unlock on the how.
Your Excellency, before we talk about some of the solutions, let's talk about the problem at hand. We know that our region is particularly vulnerable to climate change. We're already seeing rising temperatures in addition to food and water scarcity. What is the risk for the UAE?
So the UAE will feel the effects of climate change. We are seeing weather systems transform quite drastically around the world, and in some cases quite unpredictably. So let's get to the fundamentals of what you require for life as a source of energy, access to water, and access to food. All of these are disrupted by the climate change that we see here today. And how do you tackle those? One, access to better food production systems that utilize less energy. So you need to still tap onto your nexus, and less water and produce less waste. And that's where agri-tech is being heavily invested in the UAE to ensure that these processes are scalable and actually developed for the UAE's utilization. Then comes water protection, water production, and water use. So getting access to better mechanisms to desalinate water at a higher efficiency with a lower utilization of energy. You will always go back to this nexus in terms of your production process, and a lot of it is invested in by the Emirates through research and development funding, where we've committed to raise R&D spend to 2% of GDP. And a lot of the elements of our R&D prioritization lies in unlocking the potential of these challenges that we're going to face by default due to the climate change that is inevitable. Dr. Sultan mentioned something that was very important. This COP is a global stocktake, but we are all experiencing that we have not reached anywhere close to our target, which means that countries such as the Emirates, the region, is going to be impacted, and the global south and countries that did not create the climate problem is going to be impacted even more. And it's this nexus that needs to be tapped into quite drastically. The third is energy. The UAE has committed for close to 2 decades now in lowering the costs of access to renewable energy, especially solar energy, through its investment opportunities, through driving transformations in development across the sector, through ensuring the adoption at scale to come into play. And we heard yesterday the numbers of the cost of producing solar energy. Now, this is not only important for the Emirates, but it's actually going to unlock potential around the world. And Dan, something that's very important that we all need to keep in mind is consumption. So you're going to put technology across your production processes to lower emissions, but again, there's an awareness of consumption and changes in how we consume and consumption trend that also needs to be embedded, and that's more of a societal factor that also needs to eventually transform and change.
Changing the mindset of the consumer, yes, as you say. I wanted to ask you specifically about the economic issue at hand as well. It's not lost on anyone in this room that the UAE is indeed one of the largest producers of oil and gas in the world. Those oil and gas exports are still critical for the UAE economy. So what impact will decarbonization have on the economy here and the economies of the region?
So ADNOC, our oil and gas company, is one of the strongest proponents of decarbonization across the value chain in oil and gas production. And it's not something that they took on this year or last year or 2 years ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. This has been a steady investment mechanism to ensure that the footprint remains as low as possible. Now we get to the question of why. We need to realize, and the world needs to realize, that our energy transition is a transition. It's not a switch. We're not going to get to a point where we're suddenly going to use renewable energy, which means that the path to decarbonization and continued investment in the sector is very important. In parallel with this, the Emirates does not stop at ensuring that its carbon footprint on its existing industry is lowered as much as possible. We have invested in nuclear energy, and we have invested in solar energy, and ensuring that the mix of energy continues to evolve as a nation is imperative to our development and path moving forward. So, conscious management of hard-to-abate industrial sectors is very important. You're not going to suddenly stop using raw materials, petrochemicals, aluminum, steel, cement. It's not going to be a switch where we close down those productions suddenly. So we need to manage with what we currently have and manage those sectors correctly. And there are mechanisms to do that. And we do have examples today, not 1 or 2 examples, but several examples on the ground where impact has been significantly reduced and still remains and allows for those sectors to continue without disrupting the global economy.
I had a really fascinating conversation with His Excellency, the Economy Minister, this week in Dubai. We were on stage at a similar event. And he told me that in order for the UAE economy to reach its goal of doubling in size in the next 7 years, it has to grow at a rate of 7% in each of those 7 years, which is a very, very ambitious goal. But there's also a view out there that you cannot have economic growth and decarbonization at the same time. It's said that these two things cannot be mutually exclusive. Is that fair?
That's not a fair assessment, and that's the wrong way of looking at it. So I can explain to our Minister of Economy is here, and I can explain to the same thing that we have in industry to support the doubling of the economy, is doubling of the contribution of the industrial sector to the economy by 2031. How are we doing that from the get-go? There is a conscious purpose where the Ministry of Industry is coupled with advanced technology. So across our advanced technology portfolio within the Ministry of Industry and Advanced Technology, we are working today with key industrial players to increase their productivity. Now, to increase productivity of and production processes, what you effectively do is increase efficiency. So you deploy technologies across the production process to ensure that there is efficiency, again, across the production process. And what does that lead to? Reduction of waste, better utilization of raw materials and inputs, and better and more effective outcomes. So with the same inputs, you're able to maximize what the outcomes is going to be. And we've purposely designed an industry technology transformation index that allows us to see what parts of the value chain requires technology to unlock this potential. And we've included a sustainability element, and it looks at each industrial player within our economy, looks at whether or not they have a sustainability agenda. If they are a high carbon emitter, are they putting in mechanisms for reduction of carbon emission? If they are a major energy utilizer, are they putting in mitigations and mechanisms to diversify their sources of energy into the inputs? And more importantly, we are also looking at a whole of value chain. So in companies that are able to adopt and adapt a lot of these technology, we start working with them with looking at the overarching ecosystem. Where do they source their raw materials? Where do they source their energy sources? And it comes to the outcomes. How is carbon capture being utilized? How is the waste that is coming out of the production process, again, being reutilized, and what is the impact and outcomes of that? So when you're looking at it from that perspective, one, you're creating value because the deployment is happening due to economic reasons and due to the necessary factors of increasing productivity while increasing efficiency at the same time. And you're able to unlock the potential of those sectors. Now, of course, that's not going to work by itself and just solve our climate change issues. You're still going to have challenges on the back of that. That's where policies and standards come into play to ensure that it's a holistic effort and ensuring that you're able to develop the overarching program in a sustained mechanism. And if I go to our net zero by 2050 program, it's actually working with every single sector in the economy to achieve that. Because you need to reach to a point where it is, where you are tackling it holistically and not leaving it in silos. And that gets me to the point of partnerships. Partnerships are fundamentally important to the energy transition, to the transition of existing industries, and also to tackling the climate change agenda.
There's so many great technologies out there as well, and CCUS is being deployed at scale now. Other technologies are being deployed, perhaps not quite at scale, but still reaching deployment level of maturity. What would you say is the biggest barrier to reaching scale for some of those nascent technologies today?
So one is a lack of understanding of what technologies to use where and what is the potential that each technology is unlocked. And that's why we're looking at most of our cases at a case-by-case basis. Because it's very hard to look at technologies from a macro perspective and just develop them for the sake of developing them. So one is working very closely with our partners in the industrial sector to also feed them with information of where is the technology that is ready to be scaled up and is allowed to scale up to create the necessary potential to unlock. The second is ensuring that there's access to funding. Especially in lower readiness technologies. So lower technology readiness requires some forms of funding from government, requires different formats of funding from the private sector as well. And then it requires also risk offtake because they're very risky to deploy and no one would deploy them in the production process without having something that's vetted and produced. So we're also bridging the gap in what we call translational research, lifting up technology readiness from 2 to 3 all the way to 9 where it's ready to be utilized in the commercial sector. So like I said, it's several tools that needs to be part of the game in development, and it's dialogue that is absolutely and fundamentally important to this overarching mechanism. So I can speak to the first of our series of climate dialogues that we've had this year, and it's put into place to inform policy, and that's unlocking the hydrogen value chain. Everywhere from production all the way to utilization, and includes transportation, transportation and utilization and transformation of hydrogen. And we had a very interesting discussion yesterday using government entities together with the private sector to ensure that it's a holistic approach. And the outcomes continues to be understanding and learning what those technologies can unlock, where is the potential, and identifying where the potential is, putting together the necessary instruments, and goes into policies and regulations that need to be into place, offsetting risk, and more importantly, understanding what do you want to unlock.
So expand on that for me. On the policy front, what are the policies and regulations that need to be put in place in order to incentivize industry and the private sector to transition to lower carbon?
So the first I spoke about is our Technology Transformation Index. What we're doing with the Technology Transformation Index is once you get that index and start investing in technologies across your value chain, you get access to loans from the Emirates Development Bank, where we partnered up with them. There's 5 billion dirhams for technological advancement. And like we said, sustainability is an element there. The second is through our in-country value program. So these are all incentives, and that's where policies need to start. And through our in-country value program, the ITTI index provides you with a bonus, up to a 5% bonus. So if you're investing in technology, you will get a higher ICV score, which effectively gives you access to more contracts and more businesses in the long run. So these are all incentive sides. When it comes to policies in terms of deployment of technologies, the risk offset becomes a very important element. So in our research and development agenda, we've included commercialization as a major factor, so that we cover research, development, commercialization. Lots of elements goes into it in terms of building capabilities and bringing in capacity and growing capacity, bringing access to funding such as grants to be put into place to allow for the scale-up of technologies and deployment of technologies. So this is just a few examples of elements that countries can deploy to level the playing field and actually work towards an overarching objective towards climate.
And from a country level, how do you also ensure that those with less means, poorer countries, don't get left behind on this decarbonisation agenda? Because having a wealthy country like the UAE doing something is obviously very important, but if there are high emissions countries that don't have the financial capabilities to make progress on decarbonisation, then the problem is shared between the region and all of those countries.
That's why the UAE has several alliances. So we've got alliances on agri-tech, ensuring access to agri-tech across countries. There's ones on healthcare as well, because that's important in terms of the disparity that currently exists around the world. Our COP28 presidency, Dr. Sultan, is pushing quite hardly with a lot of entities around the world to ensure that access to climate finance is just, and access to climate finance is diversified in the necessary mechanism that it needs to be. And then pushing in the agenda of discussion of technology transfer and the need for technology know-how to be transferred to different countries based on the needs of those countries and based on the needs of the specific countries. This includes the investment that the UAE does in renewable energies across the world, including in developing countries. So a lot of these alliances today are working towards moving the agenda forward, ensuring that the Global South has a voice at the table, and including that COP28 is an all-inclusive COP that has all voices equally heard.
I was also looking over some numbers just recently with regards to what you're talking about, and I think the volume and quantity that has been spent is just extraordinary. So in the UAE, $40 billion has been invested into renewables alone in the last 15 years. And the country is going to invest $160 billion in the next 30 years. $16.8 billion has already been spent on renewable energy ventures in 70 other countries around the world. So that outreach is obviously really important. But I guess the question is, how much more do you want to spend?
This shows a real drive that the Emirates has towards ensuring that there is investment, and it's global. So a lot of our programs, they do have local implications, but they all have a global spirit in terms of impact. And it goes back to the Emirates ensuring that this is a shared value proposition, and it's a shared issue. It's an issue that planet Earth is facing all together, societies around the world. And it's going to impact all countries in one way or another. The impact might be different, the time scale might be different, but there's going to be an impact on everyone living on this planet. So inevitably, ensuring that we can leverage these investments to garner more investments and create a wider ripple effect, and a wider sense of responsibility towards the global change.
I also wanted to get your reaction to the comments that Dr. Sultan made, because these were obviously very, very important coming into COP28. He said, this will have to be a COP of how, and this is something that Etna was alluding to earlier. He wants to translate what is agreed inside the COP negotiation room into practical actions in the real world. So what is the call to action now, and how do you make sure that COP28 is going to be a success when it comes to actually delivering change?
So an all-inclusive dialogue is extremely important. Having only a portion and a segment of society and activists being part of the discussion without bringing industry in is not going to get us an effective solution. And when we talk about effective solutions, we need to tackle the biggest problems in place. Access to technologies, access to financing, and an effective mechanism to actually get to carbon neutrality across the world. Action on the ground. There needs to be policy changes from a global perspective and local perspective in terms of implementation. And we need to effectively work with countries to be able to provide them with necessary resources to address climate change. Those are all action-oriented. And that's what we've been implementing here in the Emirates. And again, it's not something that's been implemented this year because we're hosting COP28. It's something, like you said, we've been investing in for well over a decade and a half. And we will continue investing in it and ensuring that a lot of our partnerships have those underlying elements. And in the UAE, this is very much a government-led initiative. How do you get the private sector on side? It's both. It started off as a government-led initiative, but today it's a partnership-led initiative, and in some cases, they're ecosystem-led initiatives. The way to get it is to get buy-in. And what the government always brings to the play is initial financing to offtake risk and to create opportunities. Once those three are delivered, it then becomes an active partnerships towards development. And a lot of the examples that we're currently working on is with active engagement with our Champions Network, which is a group of companies that are well-versed in advanced technologies and deployment of advanced technologies, together with existing SMEs that exist within the Emirates, to be able to produce the outcome. So as you're moving forward towards transformations, especially in large challenges that the world is tackling, the only mechanism to do it is a whole of ecosystem drive that is deeply rooted in partnership, where different segments of the ecosystem take on a different role, but they need to work collectively and they need to work effectively to drive the change forward. And Your Excellency, as you look ahead to the future, as someone who thinks about the future quite often, how do you see the access to finance, the role of technology, partnerships and policy evolving over the next 10, 20, 30 years? It needs to, the way that we approach policy and financing needs to change. So policy making and financing has been done for quite a few times. So we've boxed ourselves globally into a standard mode of operation. That standard of mode of operation needs to be disrupted and re-looked at and re-examined based on our needs today. If you're talking about a rapidly changing world, then you need an agile policy-making mechanism, and a mechanism where financing and funding becomes adaptable to the changes that are and unknowns that are in place, and a new mechanism to mitigate risk from a financial perspective as well. Without this continued and iterative approach to design, policy-making, financing models, we're not really going to get anywhere. Because, like you said, the future is fast changing. The challenges that we are facing, that we thought we're going to face in the future, we're actually facing right now. Whether or not we want to acknowledge it is a different matter. But the mechanism of tackling it needs to be more proactive and it needs to be more agile. And I'll give you the opportunity to make some closing remarks as well. But I also wanted to give you a chance to perhaps send a message to the visitors who have come here today from around the world and around the region, particularly those in the private sector who are developing some of these technologies. What can they do here in the UAE and around the region to advance the work that they're doing and bring forward the solutions that they're providing? So the first is being a global voice in the need for change and the need for proactive change and the need for commitment and collaboration, ensuring that access to finance, again, is in place, and ensuring that access to technology is actually done seriously and does not include any barriers to export and deployment mechanisms. In terms of what we can do is continue to collaborate together. No one entity or one segment of our economy or one segment of society is going to solve this problem. and it needs to be solved collaboratively, and it needs to be solved together. There's no mechanism where we're able to unlock the potential without understanding needs and bringing in all the levers that I spoke about earlier at different points to be able to unlock the potential as we move forward.
And Your Excellency, your closing thoughts?
Let this be the COP of how. I think the world is facing challenges when it comes to climate that we don't want our societies to go through. If we're not able to address real, on-the-ground commitment with actionable programs and actionable results that we hold ourselves accountable to, we won't be able to face the challenge of climate change to the world. And the second is a realization that climate change is impacting everyone, and the footprint that you have as a nation or as individual societies might impact other regions in the world. So it's that shared sense of responsibility is what needs to drive the how.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for sharing your time, your knowledge and your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Her Excellency Sarah Al Amiri, the UAE Minister of State for Advanced Technology. Thank you again.